Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about Islam and specifically an argument I sometimes see from Muslims. Sometimes critics of Islam will convert to Islam, and many Muslims will argue this is miraculous, unexpected, and in some ways speaks to Islam being so convincing that even its critics can't help but agree that it's true. However, I'd actually argue that anti-Muslims converting and becoming Muslim isn't that surprising at all, because most examples of anti-Muslims converting aren't actually properly described as critics of Islam, but would instead be more accurately described as Islamophobes. Obviously, the term Islamophobe is kind of silly, especially insofar as it's taken to describe a bigotry. Islam is a series of claims about reality, and also a belief system with ethical implications for its adherents. So it seems a bit silly to suggest somebody can be phobic of an ideology. If an ideology is bad, it isn't bigoted to oppose it. However, there are some people who oppose Islam simply because they're, to be blunt, white racists. And Islam is a religion generally held to by non-white people. Now, in case it's not obvious, I'll explain in a moment why such people might be likely to convert to Islam, but in the meantime, I want to point out that such people are radically different from what I would more meaningfully consider critics of Islam. A critic of Islam is somebody who looks at what Islam teaches and has moral and more broadly intellectual criticisms of the substance and implications of believing Islam is true. Significantly, such people would oppose Islam even if Islam was the heritage of the ethnic group to which they belong, which, should be the standard rule of thumb for disagreeing with any idea. Doesn't matter if people in the same ethnic group agree with it. If it's wrong, it's wrong. But with that said, such a person is very unlikely to suddenly realize that Islam is true and convert to Islam if they have heretofore been opposed to Islam for reasons relating specifically to the claims Islam makes. I, for example, have looked into Islam, concluded that it has problems that there's no foreseeable way around, and therefore it isn't true. For me as a critic of Islam to then suddenly become Muslim, I would have to have all my issues addressed. But somebody whose only objection to Islam is that it's not white could conceivably convert to Islam for two reasons. Firstly, they might simply abandon their racism, and as such they lose their only reason for opposing Islam. Or else, they might actually realize that simply because Islam is not historically white, doesn't mean it couldn't be part of a white nationalist ideology. Indeed, considering that white nationalist ideology is often fascistic, it's surprising that more white nationalist Islamophobes don't convert to Islam. See, while there are plenty of good reasons not to be a white nationalist, one reason might be that in a sense it's a bit incoherent. Part of the national character of Europe is its commitment to Christianity, but Christianity really doesn't make sense with such an ideology. Sure, there's small things like Moses having an Ethiopian wife and the first convert to Christianity being Ethiopian, but more generally the whole point of Christianity is that Christ was a saviour for all nations, and all nations are called to come together as one community of Christians. You really, truly can't be a Christian and a fascist. At least certainly not a fascist with a heavy focus on the idea of race as a significant part of national identity. This is why many white nationalists instead express neo-pagan views, especially worshipping the old Germanic gods. That's why some Nazis had weird obsessions with the occult and Germanic mythology. However, the issue is fascists value power above all things, and Germanic pagans, well, quite simply, they lost. It's hard to marry the fascistic fetishizing of power with the adherence to a religion that has been largely wiped out. There's also the fact that while some neo-pagans are fascists, a lot of them are the exact opposite, liberal, progressive, New Age types. But there are, of course, Muslims who are associated with the progressive left, and for the most part, the progressive left champions Islam in the Western world. However, there's a big difference in that there is still a clear contingent of orthodox Islamic believers who can push back against that and assert what Islam is really about, which is fundamental opposition to the progressive left. Because, of course, Islam is actually quite a powerful religion, largely due to the scope of its influence, and this broad scope was achieved mostly through violent conquest. This would make Islam an appealing religion to those who value the idea of strength over everything else. There's no part of Islam that could contradict the goals of fascism at all, really. So actually it makes sense to imagine that there might be many white nationalists who are fascists and originally opposed Islam because they viewed it as a foreign invasion, but eventually worked out that actually Islam is better suited to their fascist ideology than any of the religions that might otherwise stand in opposition to Islam. But of course Muslims will still seek to make a big point of prominent right-wing politicians who used to criticize Islam but now have converted to Islam. In reality, it's not that impressive or surprising. It would only mean anything at all if somebody converted to Islam after being opposed to Islam for reasons seemingly unrelated to generally far-right political tendencies. Although even then, it wouldn't be that big of a deal because people do change their minds on issues all the time, and some grifters might realize they can get a lot of attention from appearing to have prominently changed their minds on an issue. Anyway, I'd like to close with a quote. You see, it's been our misfortune to have the wrong religion. Why didn't we have the religion of the Japanese, who regard sacrifice for the fatherland as the highest good? The Mohammedan religion, too, would have been more compatible to us than Christianity. Why did it have to be Christianity? Adolf Hitler.